Hello folks, welcome back. Hope everyone is doing very well. In this presentation, I'm going to be going over chapter 4 from my book. That's going to cover my first entheogen mushroom experience at Badbury Rings, where I saw the firmament. I'm going to talk about our DNA and how it plugs into our holographic template under Keylontic science, and touch on a little bit with ceremonial magic and the occult. Now, if you recollect, in the previous chapter I mentioned Aleister Crowley Jr., which is this companion that came into my life soon, not long after I woke up, within a few months. And he accompanied me on this trip that we did, where we took 2.5 grams of Mexican cubensis in vegan chocolate at this site called Badbury Rings in Dorset, which is about a 10-minute drive from where I was staying in Wimborne in England. And it was in an afternoon around March 2018, and we're looking west, watching the sunset. And it was otherwise quite a pleasant day, partly cloudy, and I ingested it, and it took about an hour for it to dial up in order to get the high, right, for it to kick in. And within that hour, as I said before, approaching this purely scientifically in order to help pierce the veil, find out more truth. And this was the mantras I was saying to myself, unlock my higher senses, connect to my higher self, seeking the truth, show me the truth, etc. And so it was very conscious, me working with this in order to use as a tool to try and reveal more of the hidden nature of our reality. And so after about an hour, I was, experiencing the high. It was really dialed in, and I started noticing a lot of fractal patterns and geometric patterns over the landscape of the grass and the fields that my consciousness was starting to connect, which was quite cool, like lattices. I then kind of led back and just looked at the sky between the clouds, the blue sky, and all of a sudden this kind of membrane appeared to me, which covered the whole atmosphere behind the clouds within the blue sky, right? As far as I could see along the horizon, all around me, with what looked like this kind of super alien type structure that was hyperdimensional and very advanced, that I thought initially was the firmament. And after about kind of 30 seconds of seeing this, I commented to Aleister Crowley Jr., who was, accompanying me on this trip, that what I was seeing, and I asked him whether he was seeing the same. And he also confirmed that he was starting to see the same structure reveal itself to him, which was really quite interesting, in order to look for validity that wasn't just a pigment of my imagination and a hallucination, right? That I believe, given what happens during the process of taking entheogen, especially with psilocybin mushrooms, your pupils dilate. And I hazard a guess that obviously allows in more of the light spectrum that we're otherwise calibrated away from seeing reveal itself to us in regards to these structures and sometimes entities that you might come across, and other structures within the hologram that may be hidden within our calibrated state, right up in the higher dimensions, that kind of overlaying on this dimensional density 1, harmonic universe 1 that we're currently calibrated to. And what was interesting prior to that, just recollected, prior to that there was kind of like a interesting intervention in regards to my trip trying to be hijacked, where I started to notice the clouds were very fluid and they were morphing to different shapes, as you see when you're sober anyway, looking up at the sky. If anyone's observed clouds, they're very wispy, very etheric up in that higher atmosphere. And one particular cloud actually started to morph and change to become a skull. And this skull kind of expanded and kind of like turned to face me and kind of like come over me as if it was like imposing itself on me in order to kind of induce fear. And I remember seeing this and recognizing this and kind of thinking, no, you're not going to control my trip. I'm in control here. I'm in the driving seat, and kind of just pushed it back with my mentality, with what it was trying to seed. That otherwise then dispersed it not too long after that event, which is where in the book I go into this concept of what they say in the occult in regards to the air element, and the story of how Lucifer fell from heaven with the Shemayim, which is the divine fire, and the cosmogeny that goes with that, particularly taken from Manly P. Hall's book, The Secret Teaching of All Ages, which is based on a lot of the Kabbalistic and Rosicrucian symbologies and philosophies and history in regards to the so-called fallout in heaven and the structure of creation, especially modeled off of the Kabbalah that I talk about, when they say how fluid the upper atmosphere is and how it's governed by the prince of the air, which is Beelzebub. And so I write about and speculate whether that was the case, whether some of these elementals were toying with me, or this, Beelzebub in particularly was toying with me, obviously post-analysis and looking back when writing this book as to what was going on there, or was it technologically induced, or was it spiritually induced, me kind of seeing that. And this is where obviously goes back into kind of synthesizing the two worlds of the spiritual worlds and the scientific holographic nature of our reality with interdimensionality and extraterrestrials and technology. So I'm just going to read from my book, which emphasizes more of this kind of fact regarding the spirituality side of things with the occult, where Manly P. Hall states, in another part of his writings, von Welling also says that there was no material universe until Lucifer, attempting to perform the cosmic alchemy, misused the Shemayim, or the divine fire. In order to re-establish the Shemayim which Lucifer had perverted, this universe was formed as a means of liberating it from the dark cloud within which it was locked by the failure of Lucifer's attempt to control it. These statements clearly emphasize the fact that the early philosophers recognized in the Bible a book of chemical and alchemical formulae. Could I have maybe seen an image of the skull cast by the legions of spirits commanded under Beelzebub within the atmosphere on my trip? Was the structure I saw part of the firmament that acted as some kind of barrier to the fiery waters that formed the Shemayim, or was it some other advanced interdimensional technology that ties in with the hydrogen suspension fields as mentioned in Voyagers 2? Or was it some kind of a frequency net that surrounds the Earth, or perhaps a figment of my imagination? For it is also important to note that I did not see anything joining this structure in the sky. From the ground, it just seemed to be suspended there in the upper atmosphere. Interestingly, this structure was made apparent for no more than a few minutes before disappearing again. Observing the fluidity and etheric nature of clouds as they wisp and morph in the upper atmosphere made me think of this fluidity that is ever present within the elements, especially of air and water, in which, as Manly P. Hall rightly highlights, is very impressionable to the mind, something that otherwise has for ages on my journey created this dichotomy between the organic spirit worlds and inorganic technological ET-based manipulation. And then I comment, do ETs summon and work with spirits as well as humans? Are the spirits masquerading as ETs? Can technology manipulate these elemental spirits? Who really has dominion? If all of creation exists within the mind of God source and mind, i.e. the spirit, precedes matter, then what defines a spiritual being as compared to an extraterrestrial or interdimensional entity? And at what point does the latter gain access to the former in the revolution? So I continue. It seems we live in a world where both exist, as best described in Pierre Sabac's Holographic Culture, which is a really good book, by the way, highly recommend, which is a synthesis of this dichotomy. The two are interchangeable. A spiritual being can appear physical if it wants to, at any density or dimension. Likewise, an advanced physical being can transverse dimensions and control the atomic structure of its anatomy to return to the highest pre-matter substance of its existence, which would be akin to the spirit world. When we go into seeing later with the holographic template, what we see as light is otherwise solid when we position our mental body consciousness one dimension above. Okay, so what we see as solid is one dimensional band lower from where our mental body is stationed. For instance, here our mental body is stationed at the third dimension, so what actually we see as solid is the dimensional bands of 1 and 2, which is the atomic and elemental kingdoms. Okay, and so if we stationed our consciousness up into the astral layer, so to speak, in dimension 4, we would start seeing the mental body plane become more physical within our purview. Okay, and so on and so forth. Within the stack of creation, you'll start seeing things more solid, which is otherwise hidden from us. And so what we also see as light is simply solid once we shift our mental body awareness one dimensional band above where that light is. Okay, which is really quite interesting, quite simple to understand when plugged into the Cathara grid and this concept of the universal Stargate structure that we'll go into in this presentation. So a detail which would be determined by being's evolution, DNA coding, and knowledge gained that would integrate the spiritual body and physical body templates, effectively garnering the ability to shapeshift and exist in either waveform, spirit, and or particle form physical, as displayed in the double-slit experiment of quantum physics and best displayed in holographic science. A key component, DNA and the morphogenetic nature/structure of the being may stipulate where this being can gain access to throughout creation. As Pierre Sabac exclaims from his book Holographic Culture, the string that holds together the universe is the same structure mirrored in the DNA and the double helix. a vibration which builds form and is localized within the temporal construct. Inexplicable, the core of the DNA is unfolded into time and space, intervals inherent to the crossing of different dimensions, a portal or conduit to parallel realities. The blood contains energetically the life force, a medium which opens the door to multiple realities. An amplifier, the double helix, can hold different vibrational states, and like Pythagoras' monochord, is a frequency range, an antenna which can tune into other worlds. Moreover, Pierre states, displaying properties which are holographic, nous, the mind, and its binding substance, pneuma, the spirit, are mediums which are adhesive to noumenon, which is the ultimate nature of reality. In this cosmological model, abstract entities or universals are contrasted with their objects or particulars, the implicated and explicated order. Compatible with the aeon or the spirit, the mathematical sequencing of the DNA is governed through the alteration of frequency. Ambient, the synchronization of sound waves, the logos or spirit is morphogenetic of light, an intelligence field relative to the waveform inherent within all physical structure. A controller of the waveform, the Elah-K, a living God, is one and the same as the Ruach Elohim, the high spirits, and can manipulate sound, by definition whole worlds or universes. Profound, the implication is that the Elah-K, literally a high creature, is a living mortal, its pattern and structure contained within the information field, the spirit. The main contrariety between the Elah-K, a high creature, and the race of man is that the Elohim can control the information field, giving them access to a greater range of possibilities. Displaying holographic properties, the living gods are envisaged as physical entities and are beings which exist outside of the construct of time and space. Seemingly a very advanced species, the Elah-K, a high creature, alternatively the Ruach Elohim, the lofty spirits, have effectively disassembled reality. Paramount to the control structure, the Elohim, gods, are able to maintain different states of being and understand the inherent relationship between physical form and vibration, the spirit, a major idea expounded within occult philosophy. Hypothetically, the ramifications of a holographic science are simply astounding and allows for time travel, interstellar transportation, and the ability to switch states, physical and non-physical. So then we have a tremendous occult researcher that is propounding in his book Holographic Culture this holographic science and template to creation, without even coming into the MCEO AMCC teachings of a holographic time matrix, as we'll go through in this presentation, as I've alluded to in previous presentations too. So I write and continue. An important feature, as with the MCEO AMCC Freedom Teachings translations of the Emerald Tablets and Crystal Discs, it is very clear that the DNA accretion level of the being dictates their abilities and where they can gain access to in regards to the 15-dimensional 5-density holographic time matrix and beyond, with each harmonic universe / reality field possessing the laws of nature, laws of consciousness held there as energy as part of the holographic structure of creation mathematically that dictate the requirements of the DNA the inhabitant needs in order to tune in to the reality field's frequency, oscillations which are flashing on and off sequencing, base pulse rhythms, vibration, and angular rotational particle spin, abbreviated ARPS. Okay, so you can kind of see in my book, this is, one of my main questions was to, deconstruct the spiritual worlds in the occult texts and the more modern science look at things, which was fundamentally the New Age was basically a movement created by the Anunnaki and these fallen angelics to actually counteract the information that Ashiana Dean was bringing back on planet through these translations as Speaker One, which goes into Keylontic science and our holographic template, as we will see, which will make a lot more sense at the back of this presentation to give you more of a framework and a reference and a map to see how spirit can work and how what we perceive as spirit is simply, it can be explained through physics, through science, right? In regards to where our consciousness is stationed and what we are tuned in with in regards to what is also existing above us within this stack of creation within the harmonic universes, right? And the higher planes of existence and dimensions and densities. So as you can see here, these are a few diagrams that we're going to be going through to help deconstruct how God Source, First Eternal, according to the MCEO teachings, creates holographic time matrix arenas for us all to be able to then experience objectivity, subjectivity, and material reality, okay, which is infinite potential. To quote Ashanadean, if we are going to understand a multidimensional anatomy, we need to understand something called the templates of matter. They are like the armature or the blueprint that matter builds up on. Consciousness does not enter time or manifestation in a random, haphazard way. It is not an accident. It is a highly ordered mathematical geometrical system of arranging units of energy, units of consciousness into certain patterns where manifestation can take place. There is a primal order to the structure of the universe, and there is a primal order to the structure of human biology and consciousness. There is also a primal substance. We have a vast field of source, a vast field of pure consciousness that underlies all of creation. It is totally alive, totally free within itself, totally whole, totally integrated. Source brings its attention to a point of focus, and in doing so creates structure around it. That structure manifests as the first particle emerging within Source. These particle are the smallest units of energy substance, electrotonal units of consciousness, the consciousness of God, the consciousness of Source. They are the building blocks of morphogenetic fields, matter, and individual conscious identity. They operate as minute perpetual motion fission fusion generators. And you can see there on the top left, that's a diagram of a particum that she's talking about. Okay, and so within the particle, there's phasing that happens through fission fusion that produces the electromagnetic masculine feminine qualities of creation for a particum and particle. She continues, the holographic template is literally the secret blueprint that you do not see, behind which and under which matter is accreting or matter is manufactured. Consciousness is energy, and energy is conscious. Consciousness is a substance. It is a substance that takes on the form of waveforms. They can be standing waves or moving waves, but the templates upon which density or matter manifestation occurs are standing waveforms. Standing waves oscillate and vibrate. Oscillation is when the particum and particle actually flash on into manifestation and you would see them. Vibration is when they flash off and go back into the creation point. So particle, and particum, to explain this units of consciousness, these are the smallest units of energy substance, electrotonal units of consciousness that are the building blocks of morphogenetic fields, matter, and individuated conscious identity. Operate as minute perpetual motion fission fusion generators, omnipolar units of energy, meaning they have the polarity of both negative and positive, but also have no polarity at the same time. An omnipolar unit can be understood as simply a vibration, a unit of energy that just holds a vibration and is not yet manifest. It exists in an antimatter state of non-manifestation, but it is still holding a pattern on which form will build. Okay, and that's a diagram again on the top left. Now under particle grids, which is the diagram next to it, which is this lattice type structure you see, these are particle grids, which are the fabric of morphogenetic field structure. Particle units group to form interwoven strands, then grids of electrotonal substance out of which morphogenetic fields are fashioned. Out of a unified field of particle units, particle grids form to create the frequency bands that make up the dimensional fields and then form individuated morphogenetic fields. Then we have these particle units, okay, you see next to it on the right, top right, with A and B. So we have particle units continue to group or accrete upon the particle grids, forming A. What you see there are called chelons, which are crystallizations of frozen light, which are standing scalar wave patterns and fixed points of tonal frequency. And B, next to it, are chelon codes, which are complex groupings of chelons, which together form a crystalline template of light spectra, sound frequency, and electromagnetism that is the morphogenetic field crystal body, the blueprint upon which matter and identity will manifest. So the nature of these units of consciousness that forms the template upon which manifestation and dimensionality, physical reality occurs, happens through phasing or sequencing of the particle from vibration to oscillation, which is referred to as particle phasing, the starting point of which is this omnipolar state, which is the antimatter sound upon which the bipolar state of electromagnetism is produced, giving birth to light. Thus, the sequencing of on and off occurs sound, light, vibration, oscillation, where groups of particle units come together to form chelons and more complex chelon codes, which provide a standing wave field or scalar wave pattern upon which source manifests structure in order to create, learn, and reintegrate what it learns back into the wholeness of itself. In this trinity, the phasing together produces the antimatter, which is the density 5 gaseous light, and when they polarize, we have the antimatter, pKa, part K, and matter, PCM, particum, which form the antiparticles and particles that gives rise to male and female principles, respectively, with the part Chi being the original spirit, or androgen, from which the two were created. This implies we have a parallel universe that is intrinsically connected to our own, ours being the particum, male universe of matter, and parallel being the part K, female universe of antimatter. This process of pulsing and going from omnipolarity and polarity states creates opposite forces of tension in which movement can begin and a process of cause and effect occurs wherein one thing happens before another. And as Ayasha states, our bodies are made of templates of consciousness units that also phase, but do it in a syncopated rhythm. The consciousness units do not all phase at the same time. They follow a rhythmical program, mathematical program. The particle grids are like two-dimensional lattices that, when stacked and interwoven, form a 3D grid in a specific geometrical pattern that interact in specific angular relationships to each other when the chelons start to form in order to instruct the behavior of energy flowing through the particle grids. Importantly, there is an original intention by God Source that determines how these grids are controlled, how much energy will be allowed, how many vibrations, oscillations, and still points that hold consciousness. That is all controlled by the original base 12 divine blueprint Kathara grid. For eternity and balance to exist, God Source sends in pulses of consciousness to keep refueling creation, which sends energy down through this structure like a vertical wave that phases on and off across varying dimensions. Any distortions to the mathematical structure of creation will jeopardize the integrity of being able to receive these flows, effectively resulting in rips within the natural fabric of space-time that can create reality systems and beings that run reverse finite life mathematics, distortions that need to feed off of other living systems in order to survive, akin to a tumor, parasite, or cancer. And as we found out, what I've revealed so far, that unfortunately we are living in a holographic time matrix where this has happened. There's been a rupture, which has created a black hole subtime phantom matrix anomaly, where these beings are severed from that natural pulsing of consciousness that God Source normally would send forth, that those who are in alignment with the eternal templates and mathematics will be able to receive in order to exist eternally, so that they have to steal, because they're cut away from that flow. Mathematically, they have to steal and eat and consume living systems, which obviously our original holographic time matrix has and is the original organic kind of seeded arena from which that then fell from, okay, and it's been slowly being consumed by this phantom matrix, which connects into other phantom matrices from other Akasha and holographic time matrix systems, okay, that we'll go into. But like I said, there is a reset, there is a fail safe that once it gets to a certain point, critical failure, that's prevented, and like an immune response happens, antivirus software, and this is kind of divine will in action in order to help bring everything back home and rebalance everything and then just reseed it all again. And that's what we're going through at the moment. But as Yasha beautifully elaborated, once you realize the structure, the science of spirituality, you realize we are all swimming in a pool of unconditional and absolute love that was given freely as a gift, so freely in fact that we were allowed to be destructive if we so chose. We were not forced to uphold the original creation and intention of God Source, which was a joyful, loving experience of eternal life and infinite creativity. If that was forced on us, we would not be able to make choices. We would simply be puppets to a creator God someplace, and that is not the intention of the consciousness that created universal structure. It loved us so much, even though it would prefer that we did not do things like create black holes and harm each other and harm other things, that freedom is still allowed, though not preferred. Every being that ever came into this time matrix, it does not matter how much it might whine now about nobody's being fair to me. Everyone knew when they first came into manifestation what the rules of the game were, and the rules were, there is a certain way the energy systems here work. There is a certain leeway to where they can be pushed into being used in ways they were not meant to. But if you push too hard, the literal laws of interdimensional physics will push back, and you'll get consequences you will not be happy with. Everyone knew that when they came in. However, many people have forgotten. This is very important. The universe and the cosmos are self-regulating. They do not require God to play warden. God just is. And God extends love and continually sends pulses of consciousness in for manifestation and receives other pulses back home for recirculation to go back home with Source if you choose. That is an option, but God Source does not play warden. These particle units can replicate and renew themselves and are the canvas upon which chelons form that brings objects into a three-dimensional hologram. As Yasha concludes, scalar waves anchor our consciousness into dimensionality in the time matrix in order to be able to experience space, time, and matter evolution. If we can understand the basic primal substance of scalar waves, we can begin to understand who we are and how we get here, and what it means to be in a body and be conscious. We as consciousness before manifesting takes on the form of very specific arrangements of scalar waves. Our consciousness literally turns into that form in order to experience the projection, the holographic projection of space, time, and matter. Furthermore, she states, a dimension is composed of a set of chelons. As an example, let us say dimension 1 is composed of a set of 12 chelons, dimension 2 is composed of a set of 12 chelons, but also has the 12 from dimension 1. In dimension 3, it will be 12 times 3. They build on each other, so you've got D12, 12 dimensions equals 12 chelons per dimension times 12 dimensions is 144 chelons. Chelons are like the voltage and wattage of consciousness. The amount of chelons in a dimension will determine how much consciousness it can carry. It will direct how many strands of DNA they are capable of forming. And like I mentioned before, this concept of like these bodies are containers, right? And so what DNA is switched on and what it's otherwise connected to with the planet and what that supports within biology here on the planet too, dictates the amount of consciousness that can be anchored, like a container pouring water into a container if it's very limited. And you can imagine yourself as an ocean, but you've only got a small little test tube beaker, and you try and pour who you are truly as like the most highest, authentic, eternal self of your gestalt consciousness down into these incarnate bodies, which should have 12 base nucleotide pairs plugged into the Cathara grid of the 12 dimensions of the universal Stargate system, right? We should be a lot more expansive down here, but because we're running the 4 of the Yod Hey Vahe, black hole, alpha and omega, false god, wormhole matrix, we are so limited. These containers have been mutated, which is the whole, like I said before, Dance of Salome, imprisoning the consciousness down here and only really being able to receive a fractal of our true soul identity, where the rest of it is actually, you know, locked out, so to speak, of these containers. So the whole process of awakening, doing the inner work, the great work, the Grand Arcanum, etc., is to recompose those junk DNA back into, you know, the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, up to the 12th substrand activated divine human energetic template in order to be able to receive your full embodied Christos avatar self, right? Which then gives you and plugs you into being able to travel up and down the 4 densities of the harmonic universes here across all dimensions of this holographic time matrix, and also into parallel and then eventually into other systems through the 8th dimensional stargate of the metagalactic core. So it continues, if your template of identity only has 12 chelons, you will only have enough to make 1 DNA strand, not enough to become a 3-dimensional biological being. You need a minimum of 36 chelons in the template for this. The chelons build up to form matter, the atomic structure of everything around us. These chelons form part of a crystal body template that encompasses micro and macro structures that God Source projects consciousness through, that slowly crystallizes in manifest holographic forms in order so God Source can come to experience itself as separated units of conscious identity that still exists within itself so it can observe itself and its creation. As the Asha stipulates, God knows itself through us, and we know ourselves through God because we are one and the same. This crystal structure is the bedrock for the smallest known particles to become manifest, such as with the likes of protons, electrons, neutrons, and even quarks and leptons. As I briefly covered before, God Source creates a reality field structured as 15-dimensional holographic time matrices, with each one housing 5 densities known as a harmonic universe, with each one having 3 dimensions, and each dimension having their own unique flashline sequence of particle, particle, and particum, i.e. dimension 1 would have a slower flashline sequence compared to dimension 12, and so on and so forth. where even higher accretion zones exist, with more concentrated stacks of chelons that allow for more DNA substrands to exist and activate, allowing for more sequences and a higher state of self-expression that goes into what she calls the God worlds that connects through the gates and mirror, as we have covered. Due to the specific lock-in frequency that our consciousness has been embedded in within our current reality field, we are unable to perceive the other realities and waves within the electromagnetic spectrum that form the base template of this hidden structure, in order so we can phase in, syncopate, transmigrate, and enjoy other creative reality fields. When we work with our personal crystal chelon body, we are working with the scalar wave template and subtle body anatomy that organizes and instructs morphogenetically our physical matter body. The ability to ascend is the ability to transform these units that compose our anatomy and recalibrate them into the designated dimensional reality field we are migrating to up the dimensional scale, a process that involves stargates and interdimensional lock systems that work like cogs of a wheel and time within a structure that is intelligently designed. A good analogy would be a lock system within a canal that accordingly offers the voyager a zone in which the body of water frequency, in this instance, can rise or lower to match the same level of the rest of the canal. For you see the upper canal and lower canal, it's like density 2, harmonic universe 2 would be the upper canal, density 1, harmonic universe 1 down here would be the lower canal, and there are these like bridge zones, right? Density lock systems, buffer zones that separate the two harmonic universes, but allow for transition, which is what these portal stargate passages allow, which we'll go into a diagram later. I'll explain it more in depth. Another good analogy, we can think of this fabric of standing scalar waves that form from the stacking and pulsing of these units as a three-dimensional version of a two-dimensional screen as seen on a TV, computer and or phone. The screen is made up of tiny pixels that flash on and off in order to give the appearance of movement, motion, and depending on the type of TV, different technology is used in order to polarize, bend, refract the white light rays in order to produce the specific colors needed to animate the screen. In essence, if you extend this principle into a 3D screen, we have a similar construct. In LCD screens, the pixels get switched off or on electronically by using liquid crystals, which rotates polarized light, a quite fascinating phenomenon that would aid anyone in understanding these mechanics when watching examples of this process online. In David Wilcott's book, as you can see there, The Source Field Investigations, he shows the discoveries in fringe science that reveal some of these geometrical alignments that lay hidden within the structure of our three-dimensional grid that otherwise can be seen with how particular matter bodies such as planets and star systems align with each other within this geometrical grid work that also coincides with certain cycles, such as with the precessional slippage and the 26,000 great year and certain prophecies. He also speculates how the tetrahedron shape may be the pixels of our three-dimensional reality that can be stacked in any number of ways to give rise to form, which may form the structure upon which consciousness manifests itself. A striking resemblance to the chelons, the tetrahedron is one geometric shape upon which light crystallizes itself and freezes to form matter, structures built up of chelons that allow consciousness to embody and move through and into within manifest creation. As you can see there on the diagram on the bottom there, these are these tetrahedrons that they speculate, which is obviously just one of many shapes and geometries that are used to form these chelons in the structure of our holographic time matrix. David Wilcock, also reveals research done by Dr. Peter Garyaev back in 1984, which proved the DNA phantom effect and existence of a source field or morphogenetic field that holds the energetic template to instruct light and sound to start crystallizing and take form, as we have covered, where I quote from his book, when Garyaev put a sample of DNA in a tiny quartz container, zapped it with a mild laser, and then observed it with sensitive equipment that could detect even single photons of light, he found that the DNA acted like a sponge. Somehow the DNA molecule absorbed all the photons of light in the area and actually stored them in a corkscrew-shaped spiral. Garyaev proved that the DNA molecule is pulling in photons from somewhere by some unknown process, end quote. And I continue, moreover, he found that these photons stayed in phantom for up to 30 days, even after the DNA molecule itself has been removed, revealing a recording and holding pattern. And as David goes on to state, from this finding, quote, this fits in perfectly with what Driesch, Gerwich, Burr and Becker all theorized and observed. There is an information field that tells our cells what to do and where to do it. On a microbiological level, it appears that we have an energetic duplicate. Our DNA is somehow interfacing within energy field that has remained largely unknown to Western scientists and which leaves behind a phantom that can easily be measured, end quote. And I continue. So we can see, even with modern fringe science experiments, they are starting to reveal the hidden templates of a holographic reality field, a multidimensional anatomy that instructs and acts as the core blueprint for what we perceive as manifest material reality. So no longer do we have to rely on the woolly and reductionist interpretations of the spiritual texts of the occult and the Bible and scripture. So we see here in this diagram, akin to the Kabbalah's cosmic egg, we have a representation of the 15-dimensional 5-harmonic universe holographic time matrix that shows this structure figuratively. These 5 harmonic universes differ in matter density and all are 3-dimensional realities that differ according to the pulsation rhythm set by the particuli. The faster the pulsation rhythm, the less dense the matter becomes. Gross matter being harmonic universe 1, where we are, that consists between dimensional bands 1 and 3, which is majority carbon based. Then we have harmonic universe 2 is semi-etheric between dimensional bands 4 to 6, which is half silica, half carbon based. Biological life forms density 3 or harmonic universe 3 exists between dimensional bands 7 to 9 and is etheric in substance, having full silica based matter template. Density 4 is pre-matter liquid light within bands D10 to D12, and the antimatter template exists within the dimensional bands of 13 to 15, which are home to the primal light and sound fields, which houses the original idea / blueprint in which consciousness solidifies to form the matter fields in creation, and which begins to form the reality fields for the higher God worlds. If you go through black holes, realities can become even more dense and distorted. And what's interesting to note that I picked up on Yash's lectures is that in harmonic universe 1 down here, based on the manipulation that's been done and the damage done to the hologram, we are actually 3 times more dense than we should be in a system that otherwise has not been damaged. Okay, so very interesting. When we work with your subtle body anatomy and these templates we all carry, you progressively invite in and accommodate high frequency bands within your template that goes hand in hand in activating DNA. These frequencies can come in as nanosecond bursts of energy that flash on and off, and over time allow the body to hold more of that high frequency pattern. It's a way of slowly stretching your template so it does not shatter. According to the teachings, and this is very interesting, the gamma rays, right, that science picks up here are only found in the dimensional 2 bands and first part of the dimensional 3 bands of our density 1 universe, meaning the energy from the higher dimensions are a lot more powerful than what science can measure down here in our density 1 universe in regards to these carrier waves. Any higher frequencies that are exposed to templates that can't hold them will break / blow up, such as the nature and laws of energy, which is analogous to any transistor that receives a higher voltage to what it's able to receive. It will blow. So that's why it's so important when it comes to the science of ascension. Just like flexibility in a muscle in a gym, if you wanted to do more and more complex exercises, you have to gradually build up your conditioning and your strength in your muscles. Our DNA in regards to anchoring and holding energy is no different. Okay, and that's why it's so important with the mission that had been underway in order to assist gradually over many millions of years Earth, when it fell from Tara, to gradually reaccrete itself and realign itself back to the eternal organic ascension potential and those biological life forms that are kind of following along that same timeline too. That's why ascension can be pretty tough, especially down here given the mutations with these stellar wave infusions, because not only do we have like a lot of implants and damage done with the technologies being used here in the grids that are instructing our morphogenetic template in our matter bodies and DNA, but within that, as we get hit with these frequencies, these correcting frequencies, this antivirus software, right, stellar wave infusions, it does also purge and release a lot of these toxins and implants and miasms, which have to go through a process of detoxification, right? And it can be quite stressful, it can be quite painful. Like, think of it with training and conditioning yourself, where you're unconditioned and not fit, and you've been off, exercise for many years, you try to come back into it. That's kind of very similar to what our physiology can experience with these so-called ascension symptoms. And if your body and template is just unable to have that flexibility, you're going to deteriorate very fast. And this is what goes into what she mentions of the plagues in the Bible, because we knew this whole book and the book of Revelation was written around the time of the stellar activation cycle, end times conflict drama, that those beings who, haven't been consciously working to want to activate themselves and their template, then they're going to be receiving the infusions from the organic eternal life ascension timeline, and it's just going to speed up the process of their de-evolution and their path down, unfortunately, the space dust return, black hole fall. So I continue progressively. Our templates, which house our consciousness, which are also called shields, will intelligently run activations which may outpicture as various symptoms of hot flushes. They refer to it here. Hot flushes, fatigue, illness, aches and pains, etc., depending on the shield and DNA level of the individual. I've also experienced a lot of aches and stabbing pains at times in my stomach over the years, where I later came into a lecture where Iasha confirmed this as another common symptom when it comes to ascension and running energies in your template that's related to your spleen, which is positioned right next to the stomach. And this is quoting Iasha. The spleen helps to process out the reversals and distortions and transmit the current into the rest of the body. So when you mess with the spleen, you stop the body to be able to handle as much frequency or transmute as much frequency. 3 things people typically have as symptoms when activating and tuning frequency are 1, headaches, 2, tailbone aches or spine aches, sometimes in the neck, and 3, spleen, where you feel stabbing pains right in the stomach area, which can feel like it is on the heart and down your arm as it's clearing/activating, end quote. Something I've definitely come to experience firsthand on multiple occasions when receiving stellar wave infusions of higher frequency that have also been dubbed as frequency light upgrades, abbreviated as FLU, F-L-U, right? And that's certainly very true. I've had some pretty weird outpicturings, one of which, probably the most significant one, was May 2024. We had that huge X-class solar flare, which was the biggest ever since 1989, where I literally I could not sleep that night, and I knew that there was some major frequencies being, coming into my shields, my template, which basically gave me a flu, like really severe cold. And the next day, I actually put my back out. So I was bedridden for literally 2 days, as well as the flu with a bad back, which took me probably about 10 days, almost 2 weeks to get back on track again. And so it's a common theme, common symptom, which is why sometimes you can ride these waves of having like amazing energy, then all of a sudden you just get whacked and you're just so flat, so low, can get ill. And if you keep an eye on the solar flares, it tends to, like I've seen with my shield, my template interacts a lot with the sun and the sun's activity, especially when it's above an X-class solar flare that's being released. I certainly feel it, and it's very it can be very, very stressful, as my template is kind of like stretching and conditioning itself to get used to these higher frequencies that are coming in. Another key factor in particle science is the angular rotation of particle spin, ARPS. This is a key feature that also determines what can and can't be seen and stops other matter particles colliding with one another within the same effective space-time location, and is important when transmigrating into another harmonic universe, i.e. from density 1 into density 2, as each harmonic universe and their corresponding particles have specific angular rotation of particle spin in which that reality field exists within and is tuned to. An important point, Ashiana expounds, I quote, "Lower dimensional levels are not the same as lower importance. All of the dimensional levels are important. All are significant in their own way. It is like the notes in a musical scale. Each has its role. Each has its significance," end quote. These reality fields form spheres within spheres within spheres. And if we imagined God source at the center of a sphere whose radius can expand and contract at will, which dictates the size of the field in which creation is manifest, then from God source to the extreme edges of dimensionalized creation, seemingly endless in its ability to expand, the fractal patterns and templates will appear to get smaller and smaller. Likewise, if we were to turn back inward toward God's source, we will experience the opposite, an expansion back to totality, which is ascension, a process of expansion/accretion of our template until we merge back with source. As Iasha exclaims, open quote, "The reality of the consciousness of God exists as a force that has no boundaries, limitations, or form. The cosmic no thing in no space and no time that is eternal, no beginning and no end," end quote. And that's so important when compared to the God, so-called Son of God in the Bible, in the book of Revelations, being what? The Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. The true God source has no beginning, has no end. Okay, so it's just so easy then when you compare it with these other gods to see where they're coming from. Are they coming from the real, eternal, authentic, organic matrix of God source, or the false godlets, fallen angelic races trying to play God? Each density has a magnetic repulsion zone that acts like two magnets repelling each other in order to maintain the separation of reality fields, akin to the locked chambers in a canal analogy, a buffer zone that bridges two separate frequency levels. As said before, these realities coexist within the same space, but due to these repulsion zones and angular rotation of particle spin, they do not collide. Perhaps when we see paranormal phenomena with the likes of ghosts and UFOs, we are witnessing a bleed through, whether deliberate or accidental. As we descend down through the densities, we distribute parts of our consciousness in 12s. So density 5 is our Rishi level identity. Density 4, our avatar level identity, home to the D12 embodied Christ consciousness template. Density 3 is our oversoul identity. Density 2 is our soul level identity. And density 1, our incarnate selves here on Earth. If we do the math, where our avatar produces 12 oversoul identities, then those 12 each produce 12 soul identities, then those 12 each produce 12 incarnates, then we get 1,728 multi-dimensional cells within one time matrix. So there's 1,727 other selves, other yous, running around in these arenas that all share the same avatar level identity. The MCEO AMCC Teachings writes in Voyages 2 under the title Incarnational Identities, the Time Cycles, DNA and Planetary Evolution, the following, open quote, the evolution of life forms upon the planet also takes place simultaneously, and at any given time, activity takes place within each of the 6 time continua. As the planet evolves, so does the consciousness stationed upon that planet. Reincarnational identities represent portions of a person's soul awareness that are simultaneously stationed and evolving upon a version of the planet within each of the 6 time continuum cycles of an Awega cycle. Usually a soul HU2 identity manifests into 12 simultaneous incarnations, 2 in each of the 6 time cycles in one harmonic universe. In each pair of incarnates, one is male, the other female. This relationship is referred to as twin flames, but does not necessarily imply a romantic soulmate involvement. The oversoul, the harmonic universe 3 identity, creates 12 soul identities in harmonic universe 2, each of which create 12 incarnates within the 6 time cycles of harmonic universe 1. Thus, each person is part of an incarnational family of 144 incarnates residing within the 6 harmonic universe 1 time cycles. Each of the 144 incarnates carries part of the 12-strand DNA pattern within the genetic code. As the 144 incarnates simultaneously evolve within the planet through the 6 time cycles, the 12-strand DNA imprint is progressively built up in the genetic code. DNA evolves and human consciousness expands as identity evolves with the planet through the Awega cycle in each harmonic universe. The perceptions of your present races are focused within the middle range of the 3rd dimension, the 6th and last time continuum of harmonic universe 1, and you perceive the reality of these dimensional bands from a station of consciousness 1-dimensional band above. When you perceive the activity that has simultaneously taken place in the lower dimensional time continua in the lower levels of Earth's body, that activity appears to you as having taken place in the past. Perception of the other members of your soul family identity who are stationed in time continua below your own will appear to you as past life incarnational memory, even though these lifetimes are occurring simultaneously within their own space-time coordinate. Identities stationed in time continua / octaves and dimensions / quadrants ahead of your own, which in your case, in our case here, would be those in the harmonic universe 2 time cycles of Tara. Tara is simply Earth's dimensional 5 density 2 counterpart, i.e. soul self, soul level identity equivalent, will appear as future life incarnational memory. As you assemble DNA strands, perception of both past and future incarnations becomes progressively more available to your present conscious awareness. So very interesting to see this fluidity and simultaneous nature of time as well. We can see here the concepts of what has just been introduced with regards to the structure of creation to be quite salient. This is by no means a detailed analysis, but hopefully serves to invite the reader to do more research from the plethora of works produced by E. Asher and the team that provides extensively more detailed analysis on this subject, a body of work that is so fundamentally important when gaining a greater perspective of our reality, so we do not become a victim in Plato's allegory of the cave, chasing shadows and becoming subject to doctrines of devils, i.e. puppet masters, observing reality through a mutated lens and formulating our ideas/views based on that. The fact that we have developed the conscious awareness of the science means that we are ready to face the final frontier of remembering who we truly are, where we have come from, and what we have been a part of. The science presented in a lot of this work is very sound and original, possibly many decades ahead of current science, which will catch up with it for those on the ascension timeline and parts of Earth which is ascending. The very nature of God's source having no beginning and no end, and designing creation in an original intention of loving eternal oneness and coevolution, and for it to be self-regulating, means God's source does not have to play Warden, as a set of intelligent laws are already woven into the fabric of physics when it comes to cause and effect. You reap what you sow, means every being will be served their just deserts. It doesn't punish, it allows all, and it just is, with everyone knowing the laws and rules of creation. A few key concepts to take away when assessing the differences between the different gods we have out there, especially within the three main religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, compared to the God talked about here and its eternal loving nature. So I have over on Odyssey a channel called Stellar Prince 3311 that I'll put up in a link in the description that you can see here. I'll put up an image which goes into explaining these time cycles and Awega time cycles much better. In other words, it's kind of the best of the best bits of all the lectures that Iyasha has been dispensing ever since 1998, 1999. That I highly recommend going through, that I've made so many notes off of, in other words uploaded for my own kind of catalogue and library for me to go back over, because it's such a immense body of information that you cannot take it all in one sitting. You need multiple. They talk about seven times exposure, right? With this, it's probably like 10 to 12. And just to give you an idea, at the MCEO level of just understanding the external reality fields of our light and sound bodies and the structure of a hologram at that level, typically took someone 12 years to master when they decided to want to, consciously ascend back up through the ladder and stack of creation back to God, source, or eternal. Or the next stop was the inner God worlds, and once you're there, you then obviously work at the plasma level, which is the internal, eternal anatomy. And so yeah, it's a serious study that requires a lot of dedication. It had done in the past prior to Atlantis falling. That does require a lot from each individual, but we're on a rapid ascension wave, so a lot of this is going to be done for us, and we got an expressway home, no thanks to the drama that's unfolded and the failsafe that's been called. So we don't have to spend many thousands of years kind of putting ourselves back together as we go up through the rungs of the ladder, right? Jacob's ladder, so to speak, within the hologram. We got an express ticket to go back home for those aligned and consciously working with, embodying this information, taking it on board, activating the templates, and wanting to choose eternal life, organic ascension, and choosing the right virtues, attitudes, and responsibilities that go with that. So, to summarize this Kathara grid, Ashiana writes, as we've introduced before, Ka is light, which is God expression, expansion. Tha stands for the sound, which is God intention, drawing in. And Ra, the one spirit, which is the Manu. Okay, so you've got the Manu, Mane, Ire, also is linked into the Padakai, being the Manu, Mane, I think, being the Padakam, and the Ire being the Padake. Okay, so you can see this trinity is kind of otherwise described in other terms. This diagram is also called the Tree of Eternal Life. Each point refers to a scalar wave of consciousness. Other Kathara grids built on 11, 10, or 8 points are not holding the divine blueprint, and the teachings associated with them reflect the difference. Instead of eternal life, they give temporary life. They were taken out of the original 12-point grid. Things were done to them that cut off the ability to hold D12 frequency, which is the Christos frequency of eternity. These templates do not have the ability to plug into the God world template, which is where the pulses of God source, eternal consciousness comes through to regenerate the templates beneath it, right, in external creation. These templates do not have the ability to plug into the God world template. They are called anti-Christos because they do not have the ability to hold Christos frequency. Thus, they got a vampire off other living systems. Moreover, you can associate Padakai to the Manu. Oh, here we go. This is the correct version down here. Padakai to the Manu, androgen, principle of energy. Padakam to the Ire, feminine, magnetic, principle of energy. And the Padake to the masculine, Mane, electric, principle of energy in this trinity. So wherever your consciousness is stationed in regards to what dimension you will perceive as solid, the dimension one level lower, So for instance, here on Earth, our mental body has been phase locked to a dimensional 3 to 3.5, so our perception has been stuck at dimensional bands 2 to 2.5. Dimension 1 corresponds to the atomic etheric body, Dimension 2 the emotional elemental body, and Dimension 3 the mental body. Dimensions 4 up in density 2 will be your soul level identity in density 2, corresponding to the etheric atomic body. The dimensional band 5 in density 2 will be the emotional elemental body, and dimension 6 the mental body for your soul level identity there, and so on and so forth. So when people talk about accessing the astrals, they are referring to density 2 or harmonic universe 2 and the three-dimensional bands of 4, 5 and 6, which compose that reality field, wherein the lower astrals will be the elemental kingdoms of D4 of that domain, which inherently has been where a lot of infiltration and manipulation has occurred. These Cathara grids run through our bodies as well as the body of larger structures such as our planet, solar system, galaxy and cosmos, all the way up and down the scale, share the same anatomy. These Cathara centers are also known as signets or stargates, which allow you to pass from one dimensional band to another, or one density level to another, or even one 15-dimensional time matrix to another, if and when, of course, you have mastered the ability to turn yourself back into light and back into matter congruent to the reality field you are traveling to. This knowledge, maps and structures are used by beings who know how to do that. So you can see this diagram, which is called the two interwoven Cathara grids of primal order within the universal time matrix and cosmic energy matrix of the primal manifestation template. The cosmic Cathara grid for our time matrix links horizontally on the 369 side at a 90-degree axis angle to our universal Cathara grid. The cosmic Cathara grid from our parallel time matrix links with our universal Cathara grid vertically at 100-degree axis shift. The parallel universe Cathara grid links with ours horizontally on the 4th, 7th and 10th Stargate signet sites. So the 12 centers of the cosmic Cathara grid, the first primal organization of Paracai scalar grids that forms the three non-dimensional levels of the energy matrix and antimatter density dimensions 13 to 15 of the time matrix. We have a dimension as a full frequency band or a repeated sequence of flashing on and off of scalar standing wave points within a morphogenetic field. 12 centers of the universal Cathara grid. So the second primal organization of Paracai scalar grids that form the 12 dimensions of time cycles and pre-matter to gross matter density levels of the time matrix within the energy matrix. Okay, so we got the 5 harmonics that we've gone through before: gross matter, semi-etheric, etheric, pre-matter, then antimatter. Then we have the 3 levels of the non-dimensionalized energy matrix within which time matrices reside. Okay, and then obviously we got here the 15 chakras and 50 star crystal seals, anatomical placement chart, which plugs us in to the Cathara grid on a macro level. This is as below, as above, so below. And we have the star crystal seals, so just read this out on that diagram. Keep human morph, a genetic field and identity dimensionally separated by controlling the angle of the dimensional Merkaba field axes in relation to the universal Merkaba fields. Regulates the angular rotation of particle spin between dimensions. Corresponds to the fire codes, activation codes between DNA strands. So it's kind of like these fire letters, almost so like the morphogenetic field to the DNA that instructs how the DNA should be composed, which then the DNA then instructs how our matter body should then be composed, right, with the RNA and DNA interactions. So we've got the 3 universal Merkaba fields, link 12-dimensional human morphogenetic field to planetary, galactic and universal morphogenetic fields. So so under the energy field here on the bottom, the MC stands for morphogenetic chakra. Okay, so the morphogenetic chakras of 8 to 15 draw energy from the universal unified fields and dimensional unified fields 8 to 15 through the universal Merkaba fields and into the 8 outer auric levels via the morphogenetic seed crystal seals in 8 to 15. Chakras 1 to 7 draw energy from dimensional unified fields 1 to 7 and from corresponding morphogenetic chakras 8 to 15 into the 7 inner auric levels via seed crystal seals in chakras 1 to 7. Once in the seed crystals, the tonal pattern of the incoming energy manifests itself in the DNA blueprint, enters the dimensional Merkaba fields and dimensional auric capsules of the body. The energy is then drawn in through the lower chakras into the nadial capsule and nadis. The nadis channels linked to the nervous system. Energy passes through the nervous system into the endocrine system, blood, cellular structure and manifest form. biological form is created and sustained through this continual process of energy flow from the multi-dimensional unified field. And as I said before, because there's been damage in our time matrix and we're living in a semi-fallen system in this Milky Way galaxy, there is damage to this template that we embody and take on, which means that this energy is hard to come down and in order to perpetuate the eternal life forms and to reinvigorate and regenerate. Hence why we experience disease, hence why we experience aging, and hence why we experience death. Okay, and a lot of that, as we go into later chapters, is linked in with the shadow body anatomy, which is plugged into these fallen phantom matrices, which are also sucking our vitality and energy on a daily basis, every second of every day. So as I said before, when the first time I came across Keylontic science was mentioned in Word Magic by Pao Chang in his book, The Occult Definition of Words. And he was explaining some of this, like holographic science and Keylontic, and I was thinking, where's he getting this from? And I couldn't see where he referenced it from. Like he just mentioned it in the text without references. And then obviously later when I came across the MCO AMCC teachings, I realized that everything from the New Age is otherwise just being trickled down from this body of knowledge and this work. And that obviously a lot of what the Separati and the Illuminati had done, especially the Anunnaki of the New Age channelers, were helping to cover up all of this salient information to stop awakening too many indigos on the planet within this covert invisible war that we're in order to kind of lead people astray and kind of weave their lives within these half-truths, so taking sections of these teachings and then wrapping it in their lives in order to, like, you know, lure people away whilst keeping this body of work very clandestine, very hush-hush, which took me, like I said, up until end of 2021 when I finally came across it, which was, you know, a good 5 years since my awakening. So for 5 years, I was kind of just still scratching around in the dark, learning about the geometries and venerating the kind of ideologies and philosophies surrounding the black hole for Kabbalistic based geometries, vampire time waves, phantom matrix, false godlets and stuff, even though obviously I had this kind of like, there's still something not right, you know, still being guided to the truth, considering it, assisting it, you know, making sure I assist it and plug it into what I've been experiencing firsthand, but still having more questions than answers, right? Especially within the New Age, it was all very like compartmentalized. And then as soon as I came across the Asha, I was like, oh my goodness, yes, this is where all of this stuff is coming from, that this Disciparati, Illuminati, and all these activated Illuminati Leviathan channelers and minions down here have been trying to lure people away from, right? In order to suck people down that path of half-truths and getting embroiled with the narratives and philosophies and ideologies and mathematics of the fallen phantom matrix black hole intruder races. So we have here the Merkaba. So this is the portals and stargates. So when stargates and portals activate, the counter-rotating electromagnetic spiral pair merges to form a Merkaba vehicle. Its center becomes a form constant still point that links various space-time locations directly to each other, creating a trans-time bridge. We have the vertical axes spiral pairs form the stargates of the dimensional lock system, which permit passage between space-time locations in multiple universes and density levels. Then we have the horizontal and diagonal axes spiral pairs form the portals of the time portal system, which permit passage between space-time locations in one universe and one density level. Okay, and we have the Merkaba is an organic energy vehicle that deals with the changing of the article rotation of the angular rotation of particle spin in order to allow for safe stargate passage. If a being tried to pass through a gate without the necessary accretion level and activations of their template, then they will spontaneously combust and shatter their template. Much more detail on Merkabas are covered in the MCEO AMCC teachings. That's highly technical but fruitful when comparing the Merkaba mechanics of eternal life systems juxtaposed finite life vampire black hole vault systems. And interesting, she talks about this blue powder gold, which is called celestaline, that is released when you go through a stargate portal, and it's this kind of like ends up on your skin. And they used to, the Dracos especially, and some of these fallen races actually used to murder humans that would go through portals in order to collect that blue powder gold. And this was a substance that was used for the true Jeshua 12 who was here, in order to induct him for a ritual that took 12 days, which is at the basis of the true interpretation of the 12 days of Christmas. Alongside the gold, frankincense and myrrh, right, this white powder gold called celestaline was used to help activate the 12-strand DNA in Jesus when he was here in order to fulfill the mission of finally bringing back down the human D12 potential, which is the first time a biological being in human form was able to do that since the fall of Breno in some 208,000 BC, as we'll go into later, which is quite fascinating. So I continue from my book. I write the cradle of Lyra was where our holographic time matrix was first seeded with life within the density 4-dimensional bands 10, 11, and 12. Aramatena is the real name for the 12 Stargate, but is otherwise referred to as Epsilon Lyra, or the Double Double. Gate 11 is Avion in its true name, and Gate 10 is located at Vega. It's called the cradle of Lyra as this is where life was seeded, and other time matrices will have the exact same structure to it, with a cradle assigned to particular stars within that matrix that houses the location of this genesis of seeding life into it. Each Stargate location cannot be moved and will always remain fixed at that location. However, Stargates can be compromised, damaged, or even destroyed, and they can be interfaced with other gates and passages. Hence why we saw, if you recollect in the Cathara diagram in previous presentations, with the little R denoted what the fallen matrix side are plugged into that universal Stargate on our side as well. Okay, and if you look at our solar system where the asteroid belt is, that was Galactic Stargate 5, where a planet called Meldek was. That obviously exploded. That is no longer there, but interdimensional Stargate still exists. Okay, in regards to holding the structure of this Stargate holographic time matrix and template system. Okay, so we have our local universe here, which I'll explain from my book, taken from my book. So this diagram details our 15-dimensional time matrix, particum matter, and a parallel 15-dimensional time matrix, particle antimatter, along with the corresponding primal light and sound fields, which are the particle, stargates, dimensional locks, and density locks. In technical terms, 1 Vecca, okay, equals 4 universal quadrants, and 1 Eka lower inner God world. That ties in with density 5. As above, so below, the locks are like the star crystal seals within our own body, which regulates the separation of conscious energy and angular rotation of particle spin within the chakra centers, which is akin to the dimensional Cathara points that act to keep our multidimensional anatomy separate from each other but still connected. Now, there's an interesting TV series called Fringe that was released that otherwise reveal the very true nature of the fact that we do have a parallel universe. Okay, so that's definitely a good one to watch and decode. That's otherwise I came across within the Super Soldier Talk community when I was going through that body of knowledge, and it certainly does reveal a lot, as well as the corporations and some of the technologies being used, but also soft disclosing the fact that we do have a parallel universe, which this model confirms in these teachings. Now I continue. So the chakras, as mentioned before, correspond with our DNA. Noteworthy, humans have potential 12-strand DNA, and indigos have 24 to 48-strand potential within their templates. As Iasha explains about the DNA, open quote, they will always appear as a double helix. What changes are the amount of nucleotide base pairs and how many sequences of how many nucleotide base pairs chemicals are contained within the DNA. So even though you will still have 2 running heli, they will have different strand count corresponding to the chemicals that build from the particle units and Kelon codes of dimensional bands 1, then 2, then 3, all the way up, end quote. And she also states in the Forbidden Testaments of Revelation, lecture disc 2, which goes into later what we will unpack with the mutations done to our DNA that I've already mentioned, with the base 4, or as opposed to this base 12 template, we all carry down here due to regressive fallen angelic race manipulation and technologies that have scrambled and limited our DNA, open quote. Right now, literally, no matter how much of an avatar we might be, before we hit that fetal template, that fetal integration, as soon as you get in, it's lights out with the mutation in the matter base here. It's supposed to be a base 12 matter base. It is a base 4 right now, matter base, and that goes right down to the 4 nucleotide bases that form the DNA of all living things. There are supposed to be 12, and they're supposed to be variable based DNA, which means some things have more bases than others, but they are all multiples of base 12, so we have a huge mutation on this planet. It didn't happen overnight. It got really bad in 25,500 BC, but it was pretty bad before that, so this isn't a new problem. What's new is our remembering it. All of this work and that we've done, all these things we are trying to cram into our brains, is about learning how to, in this cycle, take this opportunity to reclaim the freedom that was always ours and to help ourselves and this planet and the universe to heal which was our original commission, end quote. Now I write and carry on. I find this staggering, as DNA is the molecular blueprint for all living things that exists inside the nucleus of every cell. That then instructs the ribosome to start building specific configurations of proteins from the amino acids that exist within the cytoplasm of the cell. It does this by releasing certain parts of the code from the DNA strand coiled in the cell nucleus as single-strand instructions in the form of RNA for the ribosome to start building specific proteins. If you think of all the possible combinations that can arise from a base 4 nucleotide DNA strand compared to a base 12, it will be staggeringly more diverse with much greater potential. This would mean each cell will house more chemicals, amino acids, and more recipes in order to produce more variations of proteins in that biological life form. And as Iyasha states, base 12 is the minimum. You can have more complex configurations in life forms, but are all based on multiples of 12. With a base 12 activated DNA template, you would have all kinds of abilities which would allow you to connect into other multidimensional aspects of self and reality fields within the time matrix, allowing you to embody more of your consciousness and have more conscious control over your anatomy. Okay, so I can't emphasize that enough. It's so important to take away that what we see as normal down here is like chasing shadows in Plato's cave. We have been so far removed from what is originally intended as normal within an eternal life organic Christic system. Okay, and so there has been damage done. This is why it connects into the black hole, black cube matrix of the Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, Yahweh, Jehovah, Anu Elohim, and fallen seraphim and Anu seraphim races, all riding on this artificial intelligence, fallen angelic technologies to suppress, scramble our consciousness and DNA in biological life forms down here to, again, be blank slated as soon as we come into fetal integration, lights are out, we're only running around with like a sniff of who we truly are, and that makes us more amenable for people to come along and fill in all the gaps and tell us who we are, who your gods are, what we should learn, what we should do, and this is what creation is. Not having that. As soon as you wake up, you realize that we're all being lied to, so it's about time humanity literally does get off their knees. So we're just going to read through some of the text in this diagram, our local universe. So we've got figure 12 shows the particum, the matter side of our universe represents the primal sound, the primal light, and the matter fields. You can see the particum primal Cathara grid there on the left. Then we've got the density Cathara grid of the matter side of the universe down there on the bottom. There is an equivalent expression on the antimatter side, the particate side. We have a density or universal Cathara grid spanning 12 dimensions of the antimatter particate side of our universe. We have on the top the particate primal Cathara grids, and then the density Cathara grid of the antimatter side. And then the primal force currents circulate through universal vector form Eka in a God world via the density and dimensional locks and stargates E to G, then flow back to source via the Eka. So you can see you follow the arrows, and if you deconstruct the diagram, spend some time looking at it, the level of detail, you know that this stuff cannot be made up, as I concluded. So I try to scrutinize as well when I really try to, synthesize and cross-examine the mysteries that I was just still am gobsmacked, flabbergasted, amazed, and very grateful to come into this in remembering. No wonder I was guided into it. All this wonderful information that's so powerful that again just blows away all the smokescreen and mirrors and false doctrines of these devils trying to convince us otherwise and plugging us into anything that's otherwise a sub-12 system like with the Kabbalah. I mean, I feel so sorry for those souls lost and plugged into giving their life force energy away to a fallen matrix vampiring system, but c'est la vie. Like I said, free will is respected, no matter which way you go. It's just, I guess, once you come into this knowledge and you still want to choose finite life, vampire enough of other forces and, going against the Christ, so be it. At least you have had full information and now we know where you stand. And so good luck with the fall. Enjoy the fall. So as you can see here, this is the kind of ladder, so-called, of creation, of where we are down here on Earth, and then our way back up into the highest form here, which is the Akasha Aya, first God world of creation, the 12 divine scepters and the Ruches. There are much bigger reality fields that go into the internal, eternal reality domains as well. So yeah, creation is massive. So I write, locks imply a key, and these keys are unique energy signatures, sound tones, and symbol codes that house the necessary mathematics for that reality field in order to create resonance with the star chamber passage we transit. These codes go all the way up the stack of creation and are referred to as Eka and Veka codes. As you ascend up the reality structure, the codes change based on the geometries that are now forming within the stacks of creation that are all modeled from this 45 and 90-degree phasing element of the Paracai. As stated in Portals and Stargates diagram, the time portals have horizontal and diagonal axes spiral pairs that permit passage between space-time locations in one universe in one density level. Vertical axes spirals permit passage between space-time locations in multiple universes and density levels. So a Stargate allows for either up and down or across space-time travel. Likened to the Pythagoras monochord, these structures are all connected and are holographic in nature. At every level, there is the same structure evident inherent within itself. As the Asha concludes, open quote, we have a DNA template connected to a chakra system, connected to an axiotonal line system, connected to a kundalini system, connected to an antakarana system, connected to a maharata system, connected to a kira shah system, connected to a kundare system, connected to the god worlds. We can access the manu, mane, ire currents, the primal sound fields at every level within the structure. The structure is holographic. That means the whole is represented in all parts. All the levels of the structure are replicated or interwoven through all of the parts. We are not separate from Source. We have a very direct relationship to Source. Creation isn't something that was done to us. We are not victims in creation. We are an active part in creation. We are creators within creation. Part of our stewardship in creation is that we understand and acquaint ourselves with the structures of the God worlds to fulfill our role as active planetary stewards. End quote. Even David Wilcock mentions in his Source Field Investigations book that physicists agree that a 90-degree turn may be needed to enter into higher dimensions when referencing a peculiar bronze sculpture located outside of the Vatican Court, which has a mechanical sphere within a sphere, which is offset by 90 degrees. Open quote, the two spheres are offset from each other by 90 degrees, and various physics models have suggested we must make an angular turn like this, what they call an orthogonal rotation, to enter into higher dimensions. End quote. So you see how even the guys who are quite advanced in their field of physics and metaphysics within the fringe sciences are otherwise confirming a lot of what Yasha has been expensing and dispensing in the MCO freedom teachings. So you can see if we follow along the diagram, number one, you've got the Galactic Universal Stargate 3, which is our Earth, okay, to Universal Stargate 11, Lyra Avion. And we can see a density 1, density 2, density 3, density 4, up to Universal Stargate 11. So we have our 15-dimensional time matrix, Vecca Quadrant 1, Primal Field, Higher Heavens, and Quadrant 4, D12, Lower Heavens, Cathara Grids. And we follow number 2, we go into the Universal Vecca, which is 1 Vecca equals 4 Universal Quadrants, and 1 Eka Lower Inner God Worlds. Then we go to number 3, we have the Lower God World, Universal Vecca Inner Eka, okay, to the Akasha. And then we go to number 4, which is the middle God world, Akasha to the Akasha A. 1 cosmic Akasha A, higher God world spectra. And then number 5, the higher God world, Akasha A, inner Eka to Akasha Ea. Okay, then number 6, the 6 platforms of perception and holographic life experience in the natural stairway to heaven, the Akasha Ea Christos to the Rushe Crystalla, Amore Essential Flame, Manu Azurite Core Crystal, and Uniside God Core. So I talk about in my book as well the nature of the waveform particle universe that Walter Russell's research certainly re-emphasized and gave more credence to. But again, given the manipulations down here in Harmonic Universe 1, we can certainly see that there has been this kind of alpha and omega beginning and end encodified mathematically within the hologram, which kind of like repeats this cycle of having to feed in this reincarnational kind of trap, which is set up in order to harvest energy, but certainly provides, as I go into more depth in my book, greater explanations and proof as to the very conscious waveform particle reality of our holographic time matrix under quantum physics. So I write about in Ceremonial Magic and the Occult because I kind of like, once I went through the Keylontic science and the holographic template and the metaphysics and physics behind that, which is very logical, it plugs us into a better understanding and understanding as to the science behind creation. I was then obviously referring back to my books, the occult texts that I was kind of like, educated on prior to that, and I was just putting them together. There's just no comparison really, but I'll read from my book about this, which obviously it is a science. Magic is, ceremonial magic is a science that is practiced. That I think once we go through chapter 6 as well, and especially see where some of these entities with the elemental spirits are stationed too, it certainly then fits into this model of a holographic time matrix, as taught in the cosmogony of the MCO freedom teachings. So I say, in comparison with ceremonial magic in occult texts, there exists the visible universe and the invisible universe. The invisible universe contains the etheric version of the four elements we see physically, that is akin to protoplasm, or what Paracelsus describes as subtle vapor, and that this substance is the formal basis of all life and is akin to the clay of the potter. Manly P. Hall states that the spirit realms, this invisible counterpart to our physical world, has two main tiers. The first upper tier is claimed to be populated by wonderful and benevolent spirits, whilst the lower sphere, dark and foreboding, is inhabited by evil spirits and demons under the leadership of the fallen angel and his 10 princes. What is interesting is he structures the sentence to make it clear that evil spirits and demons are separate entities along with so-called fallen angels. So we have in effect 3 different classifications of entities here that supposedly reside in the lower planes of the spirit worlds. However, the upper planes are simply just spirits. So what is the difference between a spirit, demon and fallen angel? And how does this compare with the cosmogony of the MCO AMCC teachings of the Cathara grid and Goldworld's holographic template? I guess there are differences based on the spirit of the individual as to their evolution, where they prefer to spend most of their time, and God source's original intent for them and the resulting consequences to their actions when free will had been explored, which becomes atypical of their general appearance, characteristics, and what abilities they possess that may distinguish the classification of entity and where they may be bound to in creation that is inherent within the morphogenetic template and DNA. For instance, a spirit may be acting alone, but within the confines of the element it is associated, limiting it to an elemental/spirit being. An elemental spirit may be controlled by a higher entity that may be composed of all 4 elements and not confined to one element, such as a demon, an angel, a human, an Ilake, high creature, or Ruach Elohim, the high spirits, which can bend the will of the elemental spirit that reside within or below where the mental consciousness is housed. Perhaps any entity that exists within a high dimensional band/harmonic could be synonymous with a spirit or demon or fallen angel, the key determining factor being its volition, whether purposely wanting to do harm and abuse creation, violating others' free will or not. A reminder, we see as solid the dimensional bands 1 dimension below where our mental body is stationed. So with us here in density 1, our mental body is stationed at dimensions 3 to 3.5, and we see as solid the kingdoms beneath us, the 2D emotional body and 1D elemental body. The realms above us in frequency are invisible to us, and normally the rule of thumb is what we see as light will appear as matter at a higher density/frequency, and as we move up the densities and the harmonics, more lights, elements, structures and beings will become visible that exist in the next harmonic that would otherwise be completely invisible to us here. So within the model of a 15-dimensional holographic time matrix, there are 4 planes above us with 4 different sets of their equivalent elemental kingdoms, emotional body planes and mental body planes that forms the 3-dimensional bands of that reality field, all populated by conscious beings. For example, what we see is the metal tungsten down here in harmonic universe 1 is known as mana in density 3 in its higher frequency state. That's why I showed the diagram of Walter Russell's elemental chart. Kind of shows how there's different variations of the same representation of energy made manifest, but along the harmonic scale in different densities. So tungsten down here is otherwise mana up in density 3, which is interesting because the ring that cracked for me in another ritual that I did that's linked into Saturn was made of tungsten. And density 3 is where Arcturus is located, which connects into Stargate, Universal Stargate 7, which connects into Galactic Stargate 7 here on our solar system, which is Saturn. So very, very interesting that how it all connects. Likewise, every being, element, animal and plant has a higher counterpart in this interconnected stack of creation, and depending on its state of evolution and choices, it will determine its nature and place within creation as well as what it can gain access to. And as you can see here, there's a few diagrams of some of the sigils and signs relating to celestial magic, ceremonial magic. We've got the magic circle here. The above figure is a complete and faithful representation of a magic circle as designed by medieval conjurers for the invocation of spirits. The magician, accompanied by his assistant, takes his place at the point formed by the crossing of the central lines marked magister. The words about the circle are the names of the invisible intelligences, and the small crosses mark points at which certain prayers and invocations are recited. The small circle outside is prepared for the spirit to be invoked, and while in use has the signature of the desired intelligence traced within the triangle. Now, I think I comment in the book as well, which is quite interesting, that when you go to court, you get a summons and you have your name in the form of a sigil, which is a squiggle on a bit of paper, and you appear before a magistrate, a magi, right? And so, you can see the parallels with that in regards to magic, ceremonial magic, and how they communicate with spirits and how they communicate with our dead legal entity named strawman when we think we're being addressed when they send a summons, right? And the judge is there wearing all black. He's the magi, summoning this dead entity to appear before him in order to, basically charge you. So a key facet, as we're deconstructing the physics and metaphysics of creation, everything is conscious. Even the scalar waves that form the template for consciousness that become materialized are considered beings. With the MCEO AMCC teachings labeling them as wave people, where it is said, open quote, those wave people that make our bodies are smaller than the consciousness that make up the part of ourselves we call our cognitive selves. So those parts of ourselves, those little waveforms that are beings in their own right, actually look to us for guidance to help them evolve to higher levels, end quote. The question still remains, with ceremonial magic, is there a limit to what the magician/sorcerer can work with in regards to elemental spirits? For example, can someone within density 1 only work with and control elemental spirits within the D1 band of frequency, or can they go higher and work with the elementals in density 2 or density 3? Does this explain the hierarchy often seen within the realm of spirits, wherein the elemental spirits of D1 are subject and subordinate to their higher constituents within the higher harmonic universe of density 2's default elemental kingdom? And the higher up you go, the more powerful the spirit is, given the amount of energy would be a lot more powerful in higher harmonics compared to lower densities. Can other sentient beings in higher density fields who have their mental body stationed in the equivalent of our D3 frequency band be summoned in ceremonial magic to contract with? In reality, anyone with a consciousness and who is self-aware has the ability to contract. And where/how does the upper and lower spirit worlds fit in with the cosmogony of the MCO AMCC teachings? As we saw with the Rosicrucian diagrams on the supposed fallout in heaven, you're going to have to refer to my book to see that, with Lucifer and the Shemayim he took with him that he perverted, could this have been referring to a portion of the primal light and sound fields that encompasses our 15-dimensional time matrix? These are all questions I'm asking. Could it have been woven into the story of the original point of sin in our time matrix with the creation of the black hole and the phantom matrix 250 billion years ago, or something else entirely? Not much explanation is given in most of these occult texts, which is often vague and open to interpretation. As with the model of the Cathara grid, it is completely plausible that the spirit worlds they often refer to can mean any number of these reality fields that exist at a higher density and frequency level to our own, giving us a much broader map of potential scenarios, one of which, as has been mentioned a few times, is also the black hole matrices. These are reality fields that have been created out of ruptures of the natural space-time fabric of God's source, his original and 12-point Cathara grid system, due to the actions and will of beings who did not want to comply with harmonious co-evolution under what's called the law of one. And these places are certainly domiciled by dark and foreboding spirits/beings that share connections within time matrices from which they fell. And each one can seemingly connect into one another, even from other Akashic systems via wormhole networks, creating this kind of collective shadow world of fallen matrices that can be navigated and inhabited by beings who have the codes to it. And those holographic time matrices that unfortunately had created, but there had been a rupture within, which then connects them into this wormhole structure of the fallen phantom matrices, are susceptible to being gained access by these fallen races in order to, inevitably their agenda is to perpetuate their immortality, is to feed off of other living systems. But the intent of the Christic races is to try and come in and heal that and assist in those souls who unfairly got sucked into those subtime distortion matrices a way back out, and a way back out from chaos back into order and back into eternal life. All right, so it's kind of like there was a decision to be made when this first happened, whether to completely just close off what can be saved now with the living side of the matrix and just let that what's been sucked into the black hole cut off all connections and just let it implode in on itself, or keep everything open and allow for the bioregenesis and the healing to take place and the assistance of the guardian races, the Christics, us, the human form, which is what's created, in order to try and bioregenerate the template and heal what had been fell and kind of reintegrate it back into the wholeness of itself and its original intent of when it was created. But that obviously hadn't gone according to plan. but it got to a point where it was strategic and allowing it to go that bad, so a fail-safe divine will kind of override kicked in, which is like a no way going back now. It's like it's inevitable that we are going back, those who are aligned and consciously working with the Christ, to go back to eternal life. So it's very interesting. If you also just think about the need for these entities, so the summoners who summon these entities, right, they're normally requiring in exchange their soul under ceremonial magic. Okay, a soul is basically free will, and so that could be for one lifetime or many lifetimes, that these entities then can use you to not only feed off of, but also have you as their pawn to perpetuate their will, which is normally in order to assist the hierarchy of these fallen angels to gain more quanta of food source to help supply their immortality. Okay, so it makes sense that individuals and entities that require, in exchange for favors, someone's free will, which is their soul, sending your soul, right, which is basically your energy and your volition, that they're coming from a place of lack. They're coming from a place of finite life, which is a phantom form matrix. These entities, as tricky as they are and how seductive they are in regards to, yes, some of them are very powerful, they can pull a lot of strings, but they are connected mathematically into not receiving the perpetual life force of eternity and eternal flows of the pulses of consciousness coming from God's source. And so they rely on individuals getting embroiled in dark magic and occult rituals to sell their soul in order to reap benefits in this lifetime. Okay, and Manipul talks about it in his book about how a lot of these so-called magicians who do sell their soul, they soon, to these demons, they soon take up any means necessary to prolong their life, which goes into actually vampirism on a human level, even on this plane, because they know what's coming is going to be pretty debaucherous for them, because they're going to be under the whims of an entity that they've contracted with to sell their soul for certain pennies in this lifetime. Okay, so it's no one wins, basically. The demon wins always. And so, yeah, anyone aligned with the Christ who knows all about this knows that if you're having to sell your soul, then you've forsaken your own innate, God-given, human angelic Christos avatar self detroit potential, where you don't need any of these demon tricksters and subspecies, because you're so much more powerful than them and can access greater skills and tools and abilities than any one of them combined, right, when you fully come back online and are activated. So it's a fascinating, like I said, it was very fascinating for me to kind of like squeeze the two fields together, synthesize and see what came out, and cross-examine. So I continue, as with the nature of our hologram and stacked densities and dimensions, these beings are invisible to us and would fall under the category of spirits, but do have substance and control over the waveform particle structure within the parameters of what their template dictates. So one could appear to us, then disappear at will, possessing both corporeal and incorporeal qualities, waveform and particle. But there does seem to be a science involved with ceremonial magic that is quite intriguing and worth looking at, considering the first-hand evidence I witnessed with Crowley Jr. sending me images of his rituals and pacts during the early years of my awakening. An interesting comparison, a judge, obviously I alluded to this before, but I wrote about it. An interesting comparison, a judge is also considered a magistrate who sends a summons to an entity in order to appear before him, so he or she may be heard in the case. This requires funny squiggles on paper, a sigil, in the form of a name, which is an energetic signature representing the sound tones of that being. So it seems that a hierarchy exists within demonology, which is found as an inherent structure of the black hole fallen angelic races as taught in the MCO AMCC teachings, wherein the powers of demons are determined by the souls of demon possessors and controls. A soul is linked to the psyche, which is linked to the will, a commodity that is often traded in ceremonial magic or captured predatorily, which obviously then allows the energy siphoning and everything else, which may denote its power and rank amongst other demons/entities. Fallen angels may then be regarded as an angelic being who originally came into dimensionalized creation within any given time matrix with God's source's original intent of an eternal life Christic co-evolution philosophy, but then fell in consciousness who, just like a demon, is able to control elemental spirits, thus possibly being synonymous. Another detail, breaking down the word demon into its syllables, we have DE, it's the prefix, and Mon, again relating to the moon, which DE sharing the same root as deity, which you can put those two together to mean deities on the moon. You will see later how the moon is tied in with Saturn and the cube, which connects to Jehovah and the Jehovan Anu Elohim, fallen angels. An interesting observation, the teachings from the MCO AMCC rarely mentions demons in their dispensations. In texts, in other words, refers to these evil intelligences as fallen angels, intruder ETs, but when they do, it is otherwise in relation to being under control or subordinate to a fallen angelic faction. So on page 421 of Voyages 2, when describing the Jehovian trumpet pulses and seals, Easha mentions the concept of being a demon on a leash for fallen angels. Thus, as the first 4 Jehovian seals were released, unleashing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, this is if the book of Revelation had been fulfilled and the guardian intervention of everyone down here didn't prevent that, Earth's planetary shields would begin ripping apart as the artificial external Merkaba fields generated by the HDCs held select portions of Earth's matter base and populations in transdimensional suspension. The part of Earth's template and populations held by the Jehovian dove Apin are intended to go into merger with Density 3 Phantom Arcturus via the Phoenix wormhole and HTC network. The Jehovian Anu Elohim and Anunnaki false ascended masters refer to this as ascension. It is a macabre, unholy ascension, unless of course one desires temporary, artificially sustained eternal life in a living dead thought form body trapped in the phantom matrix as a demon on a leash, commissioned to do the bidding of Jehovian Anunnaki or one of the other unsavory fallen angelic dictatorships. So it seems demons are subordinate to fallen angels in this regard. Furthermore, on page 395, she writes, if the Anunnaki's Phoenix Matrix master plan succeeded, the halls of Amenti stargates would create an open wormhole interface into other living time matrices, and the life forms of Earth would become entrapped in deteriorating thought form bodies that would become the slave demon force of fallen angelic collectives. This was the intentions of the Luciferian Anunnaki when they devised the Atlantean flood drama. This is the destiny of sorrow to which they have long desired to condemn our race. Joining the fallen angelics in their finite phantom matrix holographic prison is the false eternal life they have been deviously promising human and Illuminati Leviathan races since the fall of Atlantis. Real eternal life is achieved through genuine ascension and mastery of consciousness within the living time matrix. Okay, this Universal Stargate 7 Arcturus and these Anu Elohim and how it connects into Saturn and the Black Cube and Kabbalah is so very salient, and for me especially with the work that I did looking back with my rituals, as we'll get to, it's otherwise confirming to me, part of the reason why I've come down here to help release these timelines and technologies that, like I said, these guys just wanted to rip all of our solar system and all the 4 harmonic universes into their phantom matrix to help give them more supply to perpetuate their immortality. Their whole modus operandi for their existence is to come up with schemes, devices, ways, and technologies in which to steal life force and penetrate and take over and conquer other living systems. It's purely sickening. Another important mention on page 258 in the footer under footnote 12, referring to the main body of the text, where she writes, from the 1992 Pleiadian-Sirian agreements and the recent cohorts in the Archangel Michael, Galactic Federation, Ashtar Command, Anunnaki collectives, it states in reference to Archangel Michael, more aptly described and historically known as Archdemon Michael, a discourse that seemingly clashes with occult magic texts and the names of spirits related to particular celestial bodies are seen with the pentacles of the 7 planets diagram, with Archangel Michael being related to the sun in ceremonial magic as its associated ruler. Likewise with the other planetary spheres and their corresponding rulers that the MCO AMCC teachings does not provide further explanation on, other than potential manipulation of occult texts by these fallen angelics. But it does reference the fact that these planets and stars are all conscious beings in and of themselves, given the nature of the conscious living creation we all reside within. And as we unpack more of the MCO AMCC teachings, we will see that there are supposedly many fallen factions all vying for control over portions of our time matrix to help feed their subtime black hole anomaly, phantom matrix zones, and artificial immortality, where there are more than one of them that house races/beings that tend to not like each other. What's more, there's 2 main competing races within the fallen black hole reality zones that the MCO AMCC attests, which are the Jehovian Anu Elohim and the Omicron Draconians, as well as the Anu Seraphim. Those are the Anunnaki who crossbred with the Seraphim races, a conflict that led to the fallout of Nira in this time matrix, and as I later found out, already happened in another reality field, that this time matrix was seeded to try and heal the disputes between the 2 races that are never to be spilled over into this one. A careful study of the intruded black hole races and their affiliations reveals that Archangel Michael, being God's favourite, is otherwise part of a fallen race line known as the Nephite, Nephilim, Necromaton, Anunnaki hybrid collective of Orion, Alpha Centauri, Sirius A, and Andromeda. We also must consider that our Solar Gate 4 has been heavily manipulated, just like a whole planet has been, as well as our solar system and entire galaxy, as you'll come to find out, which certainly suggests that our sun and these planets could and probably have been plugged into these fallen black hole race wormhole technologies that can channel a direct line to these collectives that has otherwise formed the science and intelligences behind occult ceremonial rituals and magic. So if you recollect on the Cathara grid, with those universal stargates linked to certain planets and star systems that otherwise had a little R on them to denote what they would otherwise also plugged into on the phantom side of the matrix, like Tiamat, Nibiru, Phantom, Arcturus, etc. Okay, so when people are working with these specific spheres, and as we'll see later, obviously Saturn is plugged into the phantom matrix with the hexagon black cube symbolism on top of the North Pole, okay, and then how it connects into the moon. We also have Jupiter, which apparently is connected into the 666 gate network of two other fallen matrices in our universal Stargate 6, okay. And then obviously, yeah, you think people are working with these celestial spheres, they can certainly, if they harbor both good aspects of the Christ, but other aspects of the Antichrist with these wormholes, you can certainly be channeling forces and energies from these phantom matrices, even though your intent with what might be told in the occult textbooks of so-called Archangel Michael working with the sun. As we know, the sun has been also manipulated and plugged into Phantom Nibiru, which connects into these Anunnaki, that Archangel Michael could appear to be a savior, yes, when you're given the context of the Anunnaki being the gods and the fallen seraphim races with the dragon moths, reptilians, right, and the insectoid races being the devil. Okay, and so you can actually be sucked into, and I see many people, even myself, before I came into these teachings, were sucked into venerating fallen gods who are otherwise trying to coalesce the consciousness of followers into believing their enemy are the true enemy within creation, especially under the model of the Anunnaki trying to convince a lot of people within the occult, right, the new age, that they are our creators, which is so many individuals that have got large platforms on YouTube that otherwise are perpetuating this bullshit that the Anunnaki created us. It could be further from the truth. And as I alluded to before, there is a half truth in that it dealt with them creating a slave race when they came here to mine for gold, which produced the Locust Neanderthal form when splicing their DNA, some of the Aniseraphim, right, the Enlil, Enki, and Thoth lines, and the Marduk lines, splicing their DNA with some of the local monkeys in order to produce the Locust Neanderthal, which then later developed to become the Cro-Magnon, which actually entered into an Emerald Covenant because it had some of the race line genetics of the Anunnaki, that the Jehovah Anunnaki and the Aniseraphim could come back into biogenesis under the Emerald Order for a certain time before those then reneged in order to gain more of the human angelic coding down here to fulfill their agenda of the Stargate conquest, right? And so that's where the Illuminati Leviathan races really spawned from here on planet, that harbored these fallen Anunnaki souls, that was then picked up and twisted in order to think that that is how the human angelic race were created, which is not true. Okay, so it's about time we kind of call these guys out, at least help educate them, right? Share these videos to these folks and even comment. But you'll see, like I said, because they're plugged into in running the reverse mathematics, a lot of them are just agents, unfortunately, that probably haven't got the capacity to step away and admit they were wrong because their ego is too inflated and they're plugged into that kind of consciousness of arrogance and narcissism in order to correct themselves and say like, oh my goodness, yeah, I've been deceived. This is actually the truth. But it was a half truth, which sings to parts of ourselves, which why it makes it so attractive. But yeah, we must rise above that and see it for what it is. Okay, complete fiction. And so yeah, I think it's quite easy to deduct the rationale of why demons and fallen angels seek blood sacrifice or someone's soul to bargain with when requesting deeds and favor to that commodity, when becoming aware that they all reside within an ever-imploding holographic black hole prism that constantly needs to distill life force, as I mentioned before, energy and quanta in order to sustain it and their artificial immortal lives. So it is very clear with the MCO AMCC teachings that we are dealing with fallen angels, ET intruder races, under which demons are used to do their bidding. In contrast, the Kabbalah distinguishes archdemons to demons among a cosmogony that also has the hierarchy of angels, archangels, principalities, thrones, etc. Thus it is probably logical to assume that a fallen angel is synonymous with an archdemon or demon depending upon its rank, and it seems completely plausible to summon these grand spirits who are supposed to be associated to these planetary bodies and stars in order to commune with them and engage their expertise, which is at the basis of the science behind ceremonial magic, which encompasses both good and bad, white and black magic, a quality defined by the volition of its user that will determine who stands before them. And I'd add actually and correct myself there, because it's obvious that when you're working with entities, if you think you're cut away from the perpetual flows of God source, it will be in your best interest to turn up to a call of an individual who's willing to sell their soul for certain benefits in this life. Because what is your modus operandi? What do you need? You need energy, and a soul has a lot of energy in order to perpetuate your immortality, because you are running reverse mathematics. You are cut away from God source. So just think about the motivation and the volition of a fallen angelic as compared to eternal life being who's plugged into the eternal flows of God source. They do not need souls in order to grant favors. Okay, it all comes from someone who's already coming from a place of lack that they need to bargain with in order to produce certain benefits. And so they've devised this whole system of dumbing us down and stripping our powers away and ability to manifest and know who we truly are. So we're in that precarious situation to want to be in that position if someone is like really attached to the outside world of the egotistical nature of this reality, the materialism, consumerism, that, oh, I really want to get ahead in this life and this might be my only life or whatever, and I just want to get ahead and this is so boring. I'm willing to sell my soul just to be rich and just to be famous or just to be this, just to be that. And this goes on. And the demons and these folks, these fallen entities, happy days. Yes, sweet, right, we're here in front of you. We got all the power. You're just a lowly human minion. You know, you answer to us. If you've sinned, you're dirty. La, la, la. And then, yeah, okay, if you want certain bennies, give me your soul, or sacrifice others for me under the name of Lucifer, give alms in the name of Lucifer and stuff like this. It all goes on. It's because they need a feed. They're vampires. It makes complete sense. It's all tied into ceremonial magic. Is all tied into black magic. I can't see any white or good that comes from it apart from just working with our own innate capacity of being able to cast spells ourselves into ourselves, quite literally through affirmations and confirmations, which will awaken those parts of ourselves that have gone asleep, the genie within, so we can become the genie. There's no one outside of ourselves that we can go to. Yes, we might have certain teachers and guides, but those on the Christic path will just point the mirror back at you. Look at the mirror. This is what you've been waiting for. This is what you've been looking for. It's you. You are the God. You are connected through your higher conscious identities all the way back through your unique connection. That is all you're waiting for. And the only reason that you're locked out is because your DNA at the moment isn't coming together to allow you to anchor that consciousness in and for you to have those abilities. So you've got to do the inner work, boy. You've got to do the inner work, girl. Yes, you're going to be confronted with some shadows and some resistance, but it's going to be very rewarding. All right. So for me, that's why I never, ever touched ceremonial magic, but otherwise knew the magic inherent within me, within the eternal organic Christic template that I harbor and the potential I have within. And that's what everyone needs to realize. Don't go selling your souls because you're just sellouts. You're giving these fallen angelics more energy and more time to do the things that they've been doing, which is complete violation of the eternal laws of free will. So I continue. An important point: the MCO AMCC never discusses the need to even have to work with any entity outside of yourself apart from God source and your direct line to it through your own unique stack of identities that connects all the way through the dimensions that form your being back to your collective from which you came. It emphasizes that the human form was originally created as angels in Harmonic Universe 2 with eternal life as cosmic doctors imbued with the codes and potential to be free and manifest our desires as we saw fit in co-evolutionary harmony with others. We incarnate into fallen systems to help heal them. We have the capacity and potential to unlock eternal life that lays dormant in our DNA, in that of the planet/system we enter that has fallen and taken on the reversals and been subject to fallen angelic dominion agendas and manipulations. The point is, it teaches we are human angelics, but given the distortions and technologies used here on Earth, we are more like mutated humans, but have the potential to go back to our previous form when doing the inner work. We are all like Simba in The Lion King, embodying the body of a fully grown lion destined to be king, but housing the mentality of a cub still. It is a completely different universal view and context / perspective compared to any occult text I've come across, because it reveals the potential we all have, along with a model / philosophy and mathematics that shows how much we have been lied to, and how what we perceive as being normal and observable nature here in our reality is not actually how God's source originally intended creation to be. It reveals the very presence, technologies, races, affiliations and agendas and mathematics of fallen forces, which does separate the wheat from the chaff in other teachings. Granted, some occult teachings do teach that humans here will evolve to become angels, just like with what Manly P. Hall advocates. However, there are plenty of false ascension teachings that are designed to lure you into a false heaven, holographic reality system and path of evolution with the same potential, albeit coded, to an artificial reality field that needs to feed off of other living systems to sustain its immortality under a false god and hierarchy. That path will take your consciousness down black holes. That is why the occult is so dangerous, as many are not given the context of the much larger drama we are involved in, which deliberately plugs and channels a lot of people into the fallen philosophies, pathways, geometries and mathematics of the fallen angelic collectives and black hole reality fields. An interesting discussion, as the Emerald Order dispensations by Iasha claims that the biogenesis programs that were enacted as part of the Emerald Covenant allow beings who had fallen and who had served anti-Christic agendas that were not in alignment with the law of one the ability to gain back the codes necessary to align oneself with the eternal life Christic law of one and base 12 strand DNA potential that the proto-human angelic form was originally designed to allow. This stitching of bloodlines and races to offer a vessel in order for fallen souls to incarnate into and evolve back to eternal life, as compared to being stuck in the finite life false godlet dominion based agendas of warring and feeding off other systems in order to prolong their artificial immortality within these fallen and semi-fallen holographic reality fields, in which our Milky Way system is one, a semi-fallen system that fell from Andromeda. Of course, that meant that the new human angelic form was decreed to carry the codes for the Universal Stargate Templar system, thus holding the keys to gaining access to the gates and having dominion over our time matrix system, a complexity which is greatly detailed in Iasha's dispensations that is well beyond the scope of this book. Needless to say, there is a lot of parallels between the old occult-based teachings and the more modern-based New Age teachings embodied within the MCO AMCC. Even though there is nothing really new about it, it's rather just newly been resurfaced from knowledge since lost but now reseeded here, which we are now able to reconcile and really start probing intelligently through scientific analysis and cross-examination of the mysteries that should shine a greater light in synthesizing it all and separating the truth from the facts. However, should I claim to be a wise man, then it surely means I do not know, but I put my faith in science, which is at the root of the word conscience, which is the epicenter of the ability of knowing as we transit into this remarkable astral house of Aquarius, which emanates within its astral chambers the solar logos of I know, that will illuminate not only the astral house of Leo sat opposite, which governs I will, but also the hearts and minds of many as time marches forward in this most salient of times. Okay, so as you can see here, this is otherwise we're going to go into more depth in chapter 6 when looking at the Christos founders races and the genealogy and the races supposedly here in our time matrix. Okay, the fallen lot as well as the Christos lot. And yes, you can see here some of the depictions of the fallen Anu Elohim. And there's also the Anunnaki bipedal dolphin people too that connects into this. Okay, that we'll go into more in depth in chapter 6. So that being said, thanks for spending the time and working through this with me. That was a big one. I think it's so important to give perspective and context to look at the map and the foundation of how creation is structured and the intent and volition behind that, and then compare that to the other occult cosmogonies, especially within the Kabbalah, because for me, it does separate the wheat from the chaff, and it's quite obvious that the MCO, AMCC teachings, at least for me, is the truth. Okay, and it's telling us how eternity is, how it's originally structured, how it all works, how our anatomy fits into a much larger anatomy of creation, and how it's all a fractal, holographic version of itself, no matter how small it makes itself as it is poured down into the densities and into the structure of creation in order for us all to be differentiated and experience one another as all is self, okay, as part of ourselves with many different faces, personalities, etc. All right, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you over in chapter 5, where we'll be covering my Bali Black Cube Moon and Anunnaki experience, which is another entheogen trip, which is quite interesting. as well as the 27 Club, the Black Cube and Saturn, the Kabbalah, the Book of Revelations, Wormwood, Nibiru and the Beast. That's very interesting. That's going to otherwise show what Jupiter's plugged into, and some interesting maps and diagrams relating to what Nibiru and Wormwood is. Israel, the Zodiac, astrobiology, and a bit more on Ophiuchus, and obviously Allah. All right, guys, so thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'll see you over in the next one. In the meantime, stay safe, and as always, stay sovereign. Ciao for now.